Good evening, Shadow Stalkers. Tonight, we're excited to present a special treat. Join us as we delve into the gripping tale titled She Was a Vampire, brought to life by the unique narration of our special guest, Neon Static.
A few years back, when I was still in high school, we had a school blood drive. They didn't set it up at the school. We were one of the more rural ones, and I'm guessing they chose to deploy their blood drive nurses and equipment to the schools with more student bodies. But we could sign up and take one of the school buses over to their clinic. Kind of like a field trip, I guess. And like a field trip, those who signed up to donate got the whole afternoon off. Obviously, I signed up. When my name was called, I was ushered to the doors by a man who was face down in his clipboard. He just grunted at me, to the right, as he held the locking doors open, so I hustled past. I didn't see any of my classmates, any kids at all, just an empty hallway lined with doors. But there was a door open on the immediate right, so I entered it, finding an exam room. Standard, right down to that awful crinkly paper that covered the naga hide raised bed chair thing they make you sit on. I walked in, and the door swung shut behind me, like someone had walked by and pushed it shut. Okay then. I sat obediently, looking around the room. There was a knock at the door, and I looked up expectantly, but no one entered. A moment passed. Another. Then the knock came again. Come in? The door opened, and a nurse entered. Well, maybe a lab technician. She wore a white lab coat, but there was no name or title stitched on the chest. What struck me was how tall she was. I mean, not just to a shrimpy high schooler. This lady was as tall as the basketball team, the seniors even, at least 6 feet tall. Her face was made up, like caked on makeup. I didn't expect that from a nurse, or lab tech, maybe doctor. But you'd think all that foundation, that deep purple lipstick that was so popular in the 90s, well, it would smudge something awful if she had to mask up. But maybe you don't have to do that when the only procedure you do is blood draws, I guess. The woman closed the door behind her, then approached. She had this tight little smile on her face. She told me the first step was a drop test to check for a couple of general things, like flu or something. She held out her hand, and as I raised mine to place it on hers, she wasn't wearing gloves, so I assumed she was just going to demonstrate. No. Quick as lightning, her extended hand grasped mine lock-tight, and her other hand flashed out, jabbing my finger with a sudden gouge. I winced, reflexively pulled my arm away, but her grip on my wrist was still so tight. Instead of a bead of blood, it was like she was squeezing my wrist, forcing the blood out. And it did come out, running off my finger in a rivulet. I spoke, surprised and in pain from the pressure. Hey, wow, that's kinda... And like that, she released my hand. Oops, she said, but her voice was lilting, sarcastic. Got a bleeder, I see. Don't move. I'll clean it all up. And she was reaching for a little pipette, using its glass tip to pull my flowing blood from my finger that by this point had flushed red beneath the skin. She drew until the pipette was full, save a couple of bubbles near the top. It made me feel a little queasy to see them bobbing under the glass. Then she put it aside on a tray and handed me a careless wad of Kleenex, almost dropping it onto my hand. I was perplexed. Was she mad? Had I done something wrong? Or was she just tired? I looked at her face again. She didn't look angry, and she wasn't smiling all tight anymore. Before, her lips had been sort of cramped around her teeth, but now she was smiling freely, the corners of her mouth almost curling. I clamped the Kleenex over my aggrieved finger, deciding that maybe she was just in a pissy mood in general, and not at me specifically. She'd been around teens all day, and as one of them, who spent her days around them in high school, well, I could see where she might be coming from. But she didn't have to, skewer my finger, though. Then came the questions. They started off bland. Was I over 16? Had I had any tattoos or piercings? Was I experiencing any illness symptoms? Colds, running nose, stuff like that. Easy answers. Yes, no, no. Then the next question. So, do you mess around with the boys? That took me a second to figure out what she was asking before I felt my cheeks flush as bad as my finger had. I told her no, not even kissing with tongue, figuring she was asking for body fluid reasons. From her next question, though, I had figured wrong. Why not? What? She laughed, and I flushed again, both finally figuring out she might be asking as a joke, and the joke was on me, but also from embarrassment. I had only thought what, and hadn't meant to say it out loud. Have you traveled to any foreign countries in the last year? Back on track. I was looking down now, no longer meeting her gaze. I still felt foolish. This didn't feel like a doctor's visit. At first she'd seemed mad, but now she was making fun of me. It felt like a game, and I had no idea how to play. My eyes fell on her hands, which she was tapping on her clipboard. Tapping, not writing. The whole time she'd been asking questions, yet she hadn't written a single thing down. That felt wrong. I looked back to her face, but she had turned, was pulling something out of a drawer. It flashed in the light. Glass. Another pipette. Let's see that finger. I looked down and saw the Kleenex I had death gripped around my finger had gotten red and mushy, completely saturated in blood. Oh, gross! I pulled the wet mass of paper away, and for the briefest moment I saw the wound the blood was coming from. It wasn't a single pinprick from a needle. It looked like a long, deep paper cut, and it was still weeping blood. The tip of the glass pipette appeared at its edge just as it bled enough to obscure it again. Well, might as well not waste it. I was beyond confused. Can that even be used? Oh, certainly. I tore my eyes from the glass tube that was sucking my blood up just as greedily as the first one did, and met her gaze again. She was smiling even more broadly now, the wet slick of her teeth just visible between the part of her lips. Every drop has its use. A shame to waste good, clean blood. The way she said that made my stomach churn a bit. I looked away and saw more of those thick red bubbles as the tube filled to its brim. That made my stomach absolutely jump, sloshing around as I started to feel a bit light, floaty, bad. I knew you could get woozy from giving blood, but surely I hadn't given enough for... I shuddered as another pipette appeared in her hands. Her bare hands. This wasn't right. What was even happening here? But there it was, sucking at the still bleeding cut on my finger. Well, if she kept this up, I would give enough blood to feel faint. I pulled my hand away and began to stand. Ma'am, I don't feel... As I stood, the world got weirder. The light dimmed, and all I could think was, man, I'm so tired. But my stomach still felt off, and the danger of vomiting was coming up my throat, making too much saliva flow in my mouth. I think I'm... And the world just grayed, darkened, hurt. then felt cold. Then